In today's episode, I speak with Dave Brophey, a Senior Director of Commercial Banking at National Bank based out of Barrie, Ontario, with over 20 years of deal-making experience. When I think of a dealmaker that can roll up their sleeves and get into the trenches to lead and train their team, Dave is that guy. Dave is a natural leader and teacher, so this episode was packed with helpful advice and insights on how to build relationships and manage your career effectively to climb up the ranks of the commercial bank. We also discuss what it takes to move from being a player to a coach and how your mindset has to change from originating business for yourself to being a leader and trainer of others. It's not always a smooth transition, and Dave opens up about the trade-offs involved in taking on a leadership role and being clear about what makes you happy in your career. So welcome to the Inside Commercial Banking podcast. Here's my conversation with Dave Brophey, Senior Director of Commercial Banking at National Bank. Welcome to the Inside Commercial Banking podcast. This podcast is for commercial bankers that are in the business of lending money. My mission is to empower the commercial banking community by sharing best practices and the secrets to success through interviews with rainmakers and deal makers in the sector to help you fast track your career and achieve long-term success. My name is Robert Bezede, and I started my career in the commercial banking sector. Today, I'm a middle market M&A advisor helping Canadian companies sell. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and be sure to check out my YouTube channel, Finance Kid, for more content on commercial banking and M&A related topics. So let's jump into today's episode. Alrighty, Dave, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you, Rob?
Fantastic. I'm really excited to be interviewing you today. When I first started the podcast, you were one of the first names that I thought of for this. I've heard a lot of good things about you. And interestingly enough, not only are you a rainmaker and a deal maker, but as well, I've had the chance to talk to a few of the people that you've coached and mentored over the years, and everyone speaks very highly of you. So thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
So why don't we start off by maybe understanding a little bit about your role today? What do you do? Talk to us about the companies that you're working with in your target market.
Sure. So day to day, I manage a book of clients, medium to large size enterprises. Tend to be somewhat geography focused up in central and northern Ontario, but also throughout Ontario. So key responsibilities, maintaining that book of business, bringing on new business, and then mentoring junior staff and skilling up some of our newer people in the industry that have joined us.
And then what would be that average client size or the average type of deal that you typically see coming across your desk?
So the target market, 2 million to kind of 50, 60 million in credit. Where I like to play and where I feel I add the most value is 5 million to 25 million, where they're sophisticated enough to understand what we're doing, but not to the point where I'm dealing with arguably a professionalized president, professionalized CFO, and I'm commoditized, and I'm really just the next bank, the next color of the bank at the table, bringing together, the cheapest and loosest terms. I like that kind of $5 to $25 million space.
Well said. And then I guess really is that kind of what gets you excited about the role? Like
100%.
When you think about the day-to-day, like what really do you enjoy most about your role, and what are some of the things that maybe you wish you could change, or are some of the hurdles in your day-to-day role?
Yeah, so no, I love this job, right? What's really interesting about it is you do have to be creative. Every deal is different. Every entrepreneur, every industry, every subsector of a subsector. It's just so interesting. It's so amazing what we get to see because we get to look behind that curtain, the Wizard of Oz curtain, and really ask an entrepreneur how they got where they are, why they are where they are, how they think about business, and kind of just lean in. That's what's exciting about this job. Like, I truly believe the entrepreneurs in our space don't have board members, don't have the accountants. Yes, they help them for sure, but sometimes these companies are a little bit too small for the most senior accountant, and then they're too big for some of the smaller firms. And so they don't have a board or people to bounce ideas off. And so, I love it when I'm dealing with a relationship or an entrepreneur that wants to really talk and understand how things work and how we can help them and vice versa. So that's what I love about this space. Yeah.
Well said. And that was probably one of my favorite aspects of the job when I was working at Roynat, is that the entrepreneurs that were willing to listen to your advice. Tell me, what are you seeing in other portfolio companies? What should I be doing? Who should I be talking to? So like you said, there's a business coaching aspect to it, which as you come along in your career and you see more and more companies, you can give more and better advice as well.
Yeah, and I
Oh,
feel like I'm making a difference. When you are lending in the hundreds and 200 millions, and it's CN buying a whole new fleet of rail cars, it seems so hypothetical
yeah.
versus I can literally drive over to two of my clients' places of business and I've helped them buy that real estate or I've helped them buy that. That's so cool to me. I just feel like I'm making a difference, right?
Good. Well, and that's one of the journeys that most younger bankers have to make is the choice of either staying in the SME lower end of the middle market or going up and going after bigger and bigger deals. And both have their advantages, but you're really touching on the advantage of becoming a product expert, spending the years in the lower end of the middle market and not going up market,
Yep.
which I share the same view. I
Yep.
don't want to go and work on those bigger deals. I
Nope. Me
love
neither.
working with these smaller companies.
Yep.
Okay. So I'd love to then take a step back and go right to the start of your career. You've been in the business for over 20 years. You've worked with multiple banks. So maybe tell us about the journey at the start and what were some of the early lessons that you learned?
So like I got in, to be honest, on a fluke. I didn't know what commercial banking was. I think that it's like this unknown space, right? People think about banks in Canada. They see the branch network. They all understand that. Nobody wants to really sell mortgages and visas anymore, it seems. And then they think about the investment banker, this glorified sexy thing on the report on business that used to get in paper but not anymore, that's online now, and you
Yeah.
read all these great and wonderful things, and no one really thinks about commercial banking. And to be honest, I didn't really know what it was when I even applied for the job. I was in banking, I was in retail banking, I was in branch management, and I saw this job posting for commercial banking for what was called a relationship manager trainee, and it was the next job level, so I knew I had a pay bump, and I'm like, okay, it sounds interesting, and I went and sat down with the director. To be honest, I didn't have the resume that the peer group that I was applying against and the typical commercial banker has, whereas I didn't have an MBA or CPA or anything like that. But the guy, the director, his name's Mac Anderson. He's now retired. He was at Scotia. He took a chance on me, and it came down to my desire and willingness to learn and to work hard and willing to roll up my sleeves. I think also I did have an entrepreneurial background in terms I did run a small company, like a small chip stand with 12 staff. So I had that background. My dad was also an entrepreneur. So I think
Yeah.
that kind of shone some light to him and maybe I should take a risk on this guy. And that was 20 plus years ago. And I'm thankful for it.
Wow.
It's
Can
great.
I just maybe small detour because this is why I love doing these things is we've known each other for years and that's the first time you've ever told me about your previous business. So what was
Yep.
that about? What kind of business was that? A chip stand?
It was a chip stand. So my father's a business professor, or was. He just retired this past summer,
Okay.
and so he did basically fourth year courses, and because he was a former entrepreneur himself, he taught business planning, and his last course before all these kids had to graduate from their degree at his university, they had to go through his business planning program, and they would prepare business plans. One of the business plans that he was prepared was for a chip stand in North Bay, where I'm from, that was for sale. And he used to share these with me even when I was in school and when I was out of school, just because I've always had an interest in business, right? And he shared this business plan with me and he said, Dave, this guy's not going to buy it, right? It's like $1,000. He just wants first and last month's rent for the summer. And it just rolls, it takes so much cash, it's crazy. So I looked it over and I'm like, yeah, absolutely, like, Dad, will you lend me $1,000, because I had no money. And I started a chip stand, and it
And
was,
so it was selling chips.
yep, French fries.
Okay. And then were you doing like poutines and different
Yep,
types of
exactly. Poutines and hot dogs and burgers
I
out of a
love
chip
that.
stand. I had at one point 12 staff, and it was a lot. So my dad was an entrepreneur, and I saw the ebbs and flows that come with that.
Yeah.
And I definitely learned through that. So I have a huge appreciation for the entrepreneur.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And so if you were to sum up that experience, what was the biggest lesson being in the operator seat?
Don't take your eye off the ball. That was my
Mm,
biggest lesson. I had one staff member that screwed me pretty good in a
mm.
matter of a few weeks. And what that taught me is I couldn't take time off. And I was, 19-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid. And I thought that if I just went in there and counted my till and monitored my inventory, I'd be okay.
Yeah.
No, they figure out, even though they're kids, they're 15, 16-year-old kids, they figure out how to screw you.
Wow, what a story. Well, no wonder you're such a good banker coming for walking the entrepreneur's path.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. And so going back then to the start, so you made this huge pivot into banking. You had that entrepreneurial background. You had what I would describe as the fire in the belly. That's usually what a lot of commercial banking managers look for. And when I talk to younger students looking to break into the sector, a lot of it is just energy and being willing to do the grunt work and going that extra mile and finding those opportunities and delivering that client service. So probably that's what they spotted in you when they were hiring you.
I think so. The passion, right?
The passion. Well said.
Yep.
And so that was that with Roynat at the time, or was that
That was with
Scotia?
Scotia. That was with Scotia
Okay.
many moons ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So were you a credit analyst, or what type of role was that?
Yeah. So I entered as a relationship manager trainee. To be frank, it should have been an analyst role to start, but it wasn't. For some reason, they didn't put me in that. They put me in the higher up for whatever reason. The training program was, here's your pen, here's your calculator, go. So it was really beholden on the individual in the role to just take the bull by the horns. And I had 3 account managers in that office. I had 2 underwriters and a risk person all in that office. And
Yeah.
basically, I just went into every single one of their offices and said, I'm coming to this meeting, I'm coming to this meeting, I'm coming to this meeting. Let me do this work so I can come to this meeting. So
Yeah.
it was like you had to take the bull by your horns. Yeah, to actually be successful. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and I don't think that's changed at all, really, even
No.
now, where, the banks, they've gotten so much bigger than they were probably 20 years ago. Really, that first year, and that's part of one of the thing I'm solving for with this podcast is you walk in coming off the street, you have no banking experience, maybe you just graduated from school. How do you figure it out? Like, how do you actually string a couple sentences together and make it to year 2? So when you look back, what were some of the mistakes that you made in that first year as you were just figuring things out?
So my first month was a wake up call, right? So I came from retail banking. So I was in the branch banking, and all the business walks in the door. Customer is right all the time, and you just must serve the customer. My first month, I sat down with my director, Mac, and he slid a set of financial statements across the table. Said, "Dave, calculate these 3 key ratios, right?" I looked at them, I fumbled, I was sweating, I slid them back down. I said, "Mac, I can't," and he had some choice words and basically said, you know, 2 weeks' time, I'm going to call you back in here. You better be able to figure this out. It was this moment where I realized I'm responsible for my own career. If I
Yeah.
want to be successful, I have to hold myself accountable. No more of this, okay, the bank or the university will help navigate your world for you and just show you the way. So, yes, banks have training programs, but the ones that are the most successful, like the individuals, are the people that take the bull by the horns and take ownership of their own development. They have to be coupled with people that want to mentor them 100%. I'm a guy, I love mentoring people, so I'm happy
Mm-hmm.
to do it. But you got to find that person that will mentor you and be willing to take that time. Right?
Yeah. Can I just ask on that? Because that in itself is a challenge. Like, how do you find a mentor? Like right now, if you were coming into the bank, do you just approach your boss, but your boss may be busy, or how would you navigate that coming into the bank today?
Your boss should always be a de facto mentor regardless, right? In my
Yeah.
humble opinion. To me, you have to ask. So you have to get to know people within your organization. And when you find someone that really piques your interest and, oh my goodness, that person's quite bright, or oh my goodness, that was really interesting, just ask. Every person that I've ever asked, they're like, yeah, Dave, absolutely, I'll help you. I'll show you. At my former organization, they had a formal program. But before that, they also had an informal program. And if I ran into somebody and they were at this meeting, they were presenting, and there was a new way of them showing things, like I would ask them after the fact, can I just see a few deals? And we can maybe, let me send them to me. I can read them, and then I can steal 15 minutes of your time and just talk through them. Right? People, like, especially Canadians, are so open to that, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
I think people here want to teach. So I think it's just a Canadian way of living, right?
Yeah. Well, and not only that, who doesn't want to talk about their old deals?
Yeah, they're
I mean,
so exciting, right? Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
like, I would love to, if someone were to pick up the phone and say, Rob, can I have like 15 minutes of your time? Just tell me about this deal. Sure. I'll tell you everything you need to know. Sure. And it's funny because this is a business that, it's an apprenticeship type business.
Oh,
You have to
100%.
go in and you have to look to the people that have been doing this for many years and look at the product that they've just finished and ask them, how did you do that?
Yeah.
That is not just because if you're reactive and you're just letting new opportunities come at you, you're not going to learn with a live client, because that you'll lose that live client, or that live client will have a bad experience. You have to look at past clients and past product to
Yep.
really learn from, right? And so going back to that first year, so really after the 2 weeks, I assume you probably learned how to run those
I did.
governance.
I did
Good.
very quickly.
Yeah. And then how was any other lessons in those early days that you can draw?
Definitely thick skin, right? Thick skin. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to put your opinion down on a piece of paper, right? Like in your recommendation, your credit recommendation, and for somebody to tear it apart, right?
Mm.
Sometimes their delivery may not be the greatest, but it's only going to make you better, right? So have thick skin. No longer is your hand going to be held like it is in university, right? Like in this world that we operate in today, you get participation medals for everything. It's
Yeah.
not how it works in commercial banking if you want to be successful, right?
Yeah.
Have thick skin, be willing to put your name on something, write up a
Mhm.
reason as to why you think this is the right reason to do this. Outline, I always say 3 reasons at minimum. If you can't come up with 3 reasons to support something, it's probably not supportable. But have those reasons and be prepared to talk through it and fight it out. So
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, and again, just to explain that, because you're bringing the opportunity to the bank, there's another division within the bank, the risk management division, that reviews your
that's
recommendation
right.
and pushes back, and assuming that everything looks good, will then approve that loan, and then you actually can do the deal that you brought to the bank, right?
Yep. Yep.
So that relationship between, the relationship manager and risk is the most, unfortunately, it's a bit combative. It's necessary to really, draw out the best of
Yep.
everyone. So, in the early days, some people are a little bit intimidated to have opinions in front of risk. How would you recommend someone navigate building a relationship with risk and managing their reputation with risk?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? It's so fundamental to your success as a commercial banker. Like the first thing you do, take business out of it, go for coffee, get to know the people, because this is not a computer system that approves transactions. This is people talking to people. So I think you need to get to know somebody on a personal level so that they can get to know you, what motivates you. I'm not saying go there and sell yourself like a job. I'm talking about go and be a real person and just get to know them. That's fundamental. First, get to know who they are. I think that's it. And then the second one is the devil's in the details. Know your stuff. And this does not mean know the value of the building that you're lending against. This does not mean know how much receivables they had last month. This means understanding why they have those receivables, how they collect those receivables, and what fundamentally makes the business tick. I
Mm-hmm.
was talking through a transaction with someone this morning about an automotive manufacturer, and we were talking about the conversion cycle from raw materials to WIP to finished goods, and asked generally, why isn't there any WIP on the balance sheet? Tell me why. And they didn't really have a good answer. And it, to me, it says that they didn't understand the business. So if I'm a risk manager and I'm going to approve somebody's 6 million ask, and they don't understand how they convert this flat piece of metal into a seat brace for a car, we got a problem. Get to know the risk person and then understand the business, which means digging deeper than just the surface financial numbers that are in front.
You're not filling numbers in a report and then submitting that to risk.
Yeah.
You have to understand, the way I describe it with our analysts on our team is it's first level and second level thinking. First level thinking, everyone can do. I mean, you just react to the numbers. It's that second level thinking to really understand, well, why do the numbers change year over year, and what are the trends, and why are those trends happening?
Yep.
So, and really over time, you start to build a reputation with risk where they're judging you less on that. But in the early days, they're hyper focused. They see that you're a junior banker. They know that you haven't done a lot of deals. So they're going to be extra hard on you
They will
to
be.
assess your ability to
Yep.
have that second level thinking.
My very first deal, I still remember it. I have the truck from the guy, and I told him after I closed the deal with him that he was the very first deal I ever did. And he said, "Oh, great." He said, "I didn't even notice," which, thank goodness. But like my very first deal, I had 27 attachments to my business write up. It was too much for the risk team to go through, but I wanted them to know that I knew everything there is about this company and I've gone through this all
Yeah.
and I feel comfortable in making this recommendation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a very similar story where one of the bigger deals I did in my career on the commercial lending side was an acquisition line for a group of companies, and I think it was about 96 pages was the write up, and the risk manager looks at it and he said a couple words that I can't say on here, but he's, "What did you do?" And I'm like, "Listen, I did as much as research as I can. This my reputation is on the line here, and thankfully it went well and it's gone well."
Yeah.
But that's one where same thing. You go a little crazy on the analysis in the early days, and then you get comfortable later on.
You do. Mine are actually now a lot shorter, and I actually provide a lot less on purpose. I still do ask for that stuff, and I still know it, but it's need to know versus nice to know, right?
That's right. That's okay. Perfect. So you were at Scotia, and then you then moved banks. So where did you go next?
Roynat Capital.
Okay, Roynat. And
Yeah.
so Roynat, and then also you then did a stint at BDC as
So
well.
I went from Scotia to BDC, which
Yeah.
was just not the right fit for me.
Okay.
Just not a lot of desire to grow there in terms of I'm a deal junkie. I want to get stuff done, and I just yes they have sales goals, but the peer group wasn't the same.
That's right.
So I left Scotia, and it was a hard decision to leave, but I needed to move because actually it was commuting a ton to make sure I could hang out with my now wife every night, right? And BDC put an offer in front of me I couldn't really refuse. And then the VP from Scotia called me back like a year later. And Roynat Capital, I went back to Roynat Capital, which is a subsidiary of Scotia, right?
That's right.
That's how I ended up there.
And so that's a very different stream of lending because Scotia is the more senior Schedule A bank. Roynat is more of that kind of junior lender. So how did you change your lending style once you went to Roynat? Was there any new lessons learned there, going from a Schedule A to a Tier 2 junior lender?
Definitely new lessons, right? Were like they had policies, but don't really worry about them. Guidelines, yeah, don't really
Yeah.
worry about them. The risk model, like I used to say it all the time, throw a dart at the dartboard, and it was always the same investment grade risk rating there. Didn't matter if it was really strong or really weak. I'm sure you remember that.
Oh,
So
yeah, I do.
yeah, right. So IG 75, everything. Like that's the reality. I found Roynat was very flexible, right? Which I truly enjoyed that culture. And from a lending point of view, I loved how creative you could be. Like
Yeah.
basically you figure it out, you figure out why this makes sense, and let's move forward. Versus, a Sketch A bank, with the exception of the bank I work for now, we are very flexible, which I really am loving. A lot of them are very restrictive,
Yeah.
and there's not as much flexibility as I'd like there to be.
Yeah.
So,
And just to retell that in a different way, because again, just so the audience knows, I was also a Roynetter, and I
yep.
can vouch for that. Our capital is going to be more expensive than all the big Schedule A banks. So we need to find a way to make our margin. And the way to make our margin is to take a no and find a way to make it a yes, to structure the deal in a certain way, to look at it in a different angle. And so another saying was, well, every deal has hair on it, so bring a razor and figure it out.
Yeah.
So that was the mentality. What I want to maybe share for the audience is that the Schedule A's in general have more rigid lending programs, or a little bit more kind of not cookie cutter, but they were very focused on doing more volume and focused on that kind of product A, B, C, and D. And then as you go higher up the risk curve and you go either to a Schedule B or a Tier 2 lender, or you go to private credit, the rigidness of the lending programs become looser because you have to charge that type of rate. You have to be a lot more flexible. So I'm happy that you said that, because that's where sometimes people are maybe they're getting a little bit bored at a Schedule A bank,
Yes.
and they want more excitement. Well, that's the excitement that you can get either going to a Roynat or a BDC or a Tier 2 or a private credit type shop, right?
Yep. Yep.
So
And I've had lots of people work for me over the years, and I've said it to every single one of them. Like, one of the reasons why I'm a good commercial banker is because I went and experienced those other types of lending, and I understand how that works. Right.
well said.
So I think that people that stay at one level and always stay there will not have the ability to be as creative as someone that's moved around to see what other institutions are doing.
Well said. And I'm curious, so in your eyes, if you were managing your career, you were younger, you were in a place for, say, for example, 5 years, what's the right amount of time to really effectively absorb the knowledge of that institution, but then also rotate out into another opportunity?
It's a great question. I had this question all the time running teams.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, I've said to every single one of them, and I truly believe this, you need 5 years. 5 years in a portfolio, 5 years getting to know your clients, putting on business, because you're going to spend a year or two just getting to understand how that particular institutional lens, how they look at their clients, getting to know those clients. And then hopefully you're going to spend year 3 through 5 being a rock star, putting on tons of new business because you truly understand it. I know a lot of junior bankers that are hell bent on finding the next promotion after 2 years. And I think that's setting people up for failure. I got good because I sat in a portfolio for 5, 6, 7 years, even though I was asking for promotions, even though I felt I was ready. But I think now that I have this perspective, I'm 45 years old now. That time where I spent 6, 7 years in a portfolio, yeah, those clients changed and they grew and they got smaller and more complex and all this stuff. But like sitting in one location, I got to really understand how to do this job. And I think it set me up for super success.
Well, and again, it's an apprenticeship type trade.
Yep.
The only way you're going to learn is by actually doing the job over and over again. It's reps, right?
Yep. It is reps for sure. Yep.
So, and that's the thing that I agree with you. I see a lot of bankers now that are managing their career to optimize compensation in the short term, but ultimately in the long term, they're actually hindering their ability to, really progress and have that strategic experience. Because you haven't really seen your book grow, because the reality, if you go bring it back to the business coaching comment, you have 60, 100, 150 clients there that you're managing on an annual basis, seeing how they grow. You're learning through them about their businesses and how business works. So that time element's so key, and everyone's in a rush nowadays. And here's my bingo card. And every single interview, I say the same thing, which is, takes 10 years to be an overnight success. It's one of my favorite quotes. Yep. And I really want to get that across to the audience. It takes a lot of time to really become a rainmaker and a deal maker in the space.
Yep. You need 10,000 hours before you're an expert.
Well said.
That's how I think about it. So
perfect. Yep. So pivoting now towards, I can put myself back when I was a younger banker coming into the role. I was really nervous in selling, in carrying a conversation with a client, a business owner that was twice my age. They would see that I was very young. So when you bring yourself back and you're trying to coach someone that's early on in their career about how to manage a relationship, how to sell, how to develop business, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, this is a great question. Again, I had this question and coached to this a lot over many years, right? So the first thing I tell them, know your stuff. So be prepared. That doesn't mean walking through the accounts receivable and inventory and be like, okay, yes, I know you have 3 million in receivables and 6 million in inventory. It actually means going through the receivable list and looking at all the different companies that they have, maybe Googling those companies, understanding what those companies do, so you can actually have intelligent conversations about why they sell to this particular company, how they sell to this company, why they're successful doing that. So be prepared is first thing. And then second thing I say to them all the time is, look, you're sitting in front of an entrepreneur. You know how many companies they've looked at as deeply as you have? You probably have looked at, most of the time, if they're going to be left to go in their own meeting on their own, they've at least been in commercial banking for a year or two. They've at least looked at 100 to 200 companies in depth. That entrepreneur has only looked at one. So I will often say to them is, look, you can tell them your age if you want to, or your years of experience, but quantify it. So yes, I graduated 2 years ago, but since I've been in commercial banking, I've looked at over 200 companies and 40 in your particular industry sector in the past 2 years, right? So yeah, I may be inexperienced in your eyes, but I've looked at a lot, right? Put it in perspective for that entrepreneur so they can understand, like, oh my goodness, 200 companies that do 20 plus million in revenue. I've only ever looked at one. Right. Yeah. So it helps that entrepreneur have an appreciation for who's sitting in front of them, and hopefully builds up that confidence level for that junior, younger RM account manager in that conversation. Right.
Yeah.
So, and then the last thing I always say is, reaffirm your understanding. There is no such thing as a stupid question, right? So tell me about why this client is paying you in 60 days or like at 61 days. What's going on here? Right? Because if I don't pay my Rogers bill after 2 months, I'm getting texts every 30 seconds from them. So what is going, help me understand this, right? So you give them terms. Okay, why do you give them terms? Is it because your product, is it commoditized? don't be afraid to ask those questions to truly understand that business, right? So
Well said. I haven't heard that before around the experience, but that's a great way to, at least give you some confidence, because oftentimes it's imposter syndrome, right? You walk into a meeting, it's very performative. You're trying to put an image in front of the client, but in your head, you're judging yourself. So I love that. That's a really good way to phrase it. And so just to cap off on the question side. So for me, one of the things that when I work with a lot of different commercial bankers, I can quickly judge and tell the strength of a banker based on the questions. The questions are the primary sign of how much they care, how detailed they are, the way they analyze numbers. If they're asking first level versus secondary level questions, that's where you can really tell the good bankers from the weaker ones.
I agree 100%, right? Do not go to First Research and download all the industry data, but do not read the question quick call summary that automatically prints off and gives to all first level commercial bankers about the questions to ask, because they've been asked.
That's
And
right.
one question that drives me up the wall that speaks of inexperience is the what keeps you up at night question. So I find that question is actually not that effective until you've built enough rapport with somebody that you've earned the right to ask that question.
Okay, well, that's a perfect segue. So, when you look at new credit opportunities, what are Dave Brophy's key questions that you would ask any prospective client as you're touring their business and hearing the story for the first time?
Yeah, so touring the business. So first off, key questions. The devil is in the details. You need to do the analysis yourself. You need to understand what's going on. You can't just send it off to some team that does the spreads and spits some ratios back at you. You got to know the details, right? In terms of those key questions, what I really key in on is the sales cycle and how a company competes. I will ask them in 3 or 4 different ways why people buy from that particular company.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still amazed by a lot of entrepreneurs that don't know the answer to that question, which surprises me to this day, right? I talk about that kind of 5 million to 25 million loan size. I find that the people that are in that space know that answer. The ones that in the kind of 2 to 5 don't really know that answer. So I find I ask that question many different ways, right, throughout that tour, right, of that particular facility. I also find in that meeting, it's important when you go to the client's business that you tour the facilities, and you don't
Yeah.
do it after you've had the interview. You actually do the introduction for like literally 15 minutes, if that, and then you're like, let's go and walk around, because that will cue a ton of questions and a ton of conversation, and the entrepreneur is going to be that much more passionate about their business, because you're walking, you're seeing it, you're touching, you're feeling, you're smelling it, you're understanding the business even more and more. Asking them why that SKU turns more than this SKU over here. Show me your slowest moving inventory. Why is it your slowest moving inventory? What are you doing with it? Tell me about it. Are you going to blow it out? What's your thought process with it? Like in today's world, that's costing you 6%. That's
That's right.
expensive money, right? For that, that I don't know, that widget that's sitting there, right? Like it's
Yeah.
expensive money out there, right? When it was 2%, yeah, okay, roll it, let it
Yeah.
ride. Not anymore. So just bringing it back to the entrepreneur and trying to understand how their brain works.
Yeah.
I also almost always, because when you're sitting in that meeting, you're having a conversation about the next thing for them, the next piece of equipment, the next building, the next business. And I always talk to them about a cost benefit analysis. I always ask them what their ROI on it. How long do you think until this repays? Because it'll tell you how an entrepreneur thinks. So
Yeah.
most of them, like it amazes me, are 18 months to 36 months, and these things are paid for, right? And they know it like that, right? And if you can grab that information out from them and convey that in your business rationale as to why you're supportive, it makes your deal so easy with risk, right? So
Well said. And again, you're part of lending is you're judging the competence and the ability of that manager to run that business.
yep,
So if they can't answer those questions or they're giving you not so good answers, then that raises a red flag around how good of a grasp do they have on their business.
100%,
So I love
100%.
that. I love that. And I like that you said the competition one, because we're in the midst of selling a business right now at the family office. And their number one question was, why does this
Yep,
business exist? How was it for 25 years that you've been in business?
yep.
Because there must be something there that keeps you alive. And so I love that you said that, because it's so true. I think the competitive analysis of the credit apps that most bankers do, they just breeze through that. They don't
They
even
do.
think
Oh, they
about it.
totally do.
They,
It's
they
all
just
about the security. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
They just
Yep.
copy and paste. They look at they Google search and they're like, okay, well, there's 3 other companies in this area that do the same thing. We'll just copy and paste those names in and not think about it. Versus actually sitting and having a proper conversation. How do you compare in terms of price and quality, people, capacity?
Yep.
What do they do when the economy was slow? And really
Yep.
getting a sense of that capability. I think a lot of people skip the competitive analysis and don't really understand that. So I love that.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So then when you look back, I'm curious over the last 20 years, what are some of the things that you see, some of the younger bankers that you've come across? What are some of those common mistakes that you've seen and zeroed in on?
9 to 5. Hate to say it.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but it is reality. Look, if you want to work 9 to 5, it's going to take you not 5 years. It's going to take you 6 to 8 years. You have to be committed. This job is not an easy job. It is uber rewarding if you decide to lean in. So, common mistake is to think of this as a stepping stone and that you're just here for 2 years and you're going to move on to something different. So, I think the skill set that you can learn in commercial banking, you can take and you can go and run a company. You can do so many different things with this skill set. Look at what you've done, Robert. The world is your oyster, in my opinion. If you look at the profile of a lot of executives of the banks in Canada, a lot of them have commercial banking at one point. So you really learn how business works. And then if you spend enough time in commercial banking, you actually start to learn how the bank works, how the bank raises capital, how the bank approaches things from a business point of view, because you've learned how the businesses that you help also work, right? So you can become really fulsome, right? So that common error is like, it's not a 2-year stopgate, right? It is heavy lifting. I would say to people, it's 7 to 7 for the next 2 years, but the rewards will come for it, right? So
Awesome.
other common mistakes, I would say, is, and it's common thing, is like over promising, under delivering, right?
Yeah.
We've got a lot of junior bankers who think that if they can come out and promise the world, that they'll wow some entrepreneur, but execution is priority number one.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to execute.
And I say the same thing in our business. We are in the execution business. The reality is we're judged by our ability to execute and follow through. When I think about what are the key skills of a strong M&A advisor or any type of business advisor, it's managing the expectations of the client, being brave enough and clear enough to communicate when that client may be wrong, but also really advocate for what is really true in that situation, whether it's the business value or whether it's the strategy of that business. And it comes with experience. And it also comes with a little bit, to me, even in this role, I've been now doing it for about 5 years. My first year versus this year, I would say the key skill that I've developed over the last 5 years is I'm more brave and more vocal about issues. Because in the early days, you worry about those things. You're like, oh, I don't want the client to dislike me. I don't want to seem as, because the customer is always right. But the reality is, as you have more time in that role and you get comfortable, you know that what you're saying is right. You just say it. And
Yeah.
in the reality, it's not as hard to say it. It's all on your mind. What you're doing is the right thing. You're managing the client's expectations.
Yeah. No, I love what you said there. Like, being brave and being clear with it is so important. And, I use the analogy at the beginning where retail bankers, it's the customer's always right. Customer asks you to jump there. You have to respond with how high. And all the success stories are about how I helped this little old lady do this. In commercial banking, the customer might be right, but you need third-party reports to validate it. And then maybe you'll think about doing it, right? It's a very different mindset to how you have to react in commercial banking, because it is a little bit of a prove it first versus customer demands and you just get it done. So you have to think about the business a little bit differently as a result, right?
Well
So,
said. Perfect. So we're now going into the final chapter of the conversation. So
okay.
there are some bankers that will be listening to this that are approaching their first promotion towards a people leader role. And that's a scary shift, because usually the people that can get promoted are the best people that bring in the business, or the originators and the leaders of that team. But sometimes they don't actually convert over to be the best managers. So talk to us about your first promotion towards a people leadership type role. What were some of the lessons that you learned, and also what were some of the early mistakes that you made in your
Yeah, for
first
sure.
role?
So that's the Peter principle, right? Rising to the until you're no longer competent. So
Yeah.
yeah, I often question if they promote the right people, because they do tend to promote rainmakers. Rainmakers may not be the best bosses, right? So
Mhm.
my first role in leadership, in the first 6 months, I had to have a real reflection point in understanding and appreciating that people aren't motivated the same way I am. And I
Mhm.
struggled with that, right? So I always want to be the top of the leaderboard. I always want to be the best. It's just who I am. I'm a competitor. Even like in my wedding speech, I talk about when we went to my wife's house. It was very strange for me because we would converse, and then when my wife came to my place, we would compete. Right? It's just who I am. It's ingrained in me, and I really had to step back and think about what was motivating my staff and who they were as people, and figure out how to coach towards that to get them hopefully on board with whatever it is that I need them to get them on board with.
How did you find that out? Talk to us a little bit about the tactics of figuring out what motivates your team.
So, to be honest, a lot of frank and open, honest conversations
Yeah.
where, I would ask, okay, the bank's asked me to do this, right? This is what we're looking at. Like, how do we get here together? Like, how can I help you get there? And understanding what priorities they have in their desk. Because I think first time leaders and first level leaders, even second level leaders, don't have a true appreciation for truly the day to day that the relationship managers, account managers still having to deal with. And they always think, the account manager's not doing anything right now. Like, what the heck? Why aren't they making 10 calls today? So, you know, having an open, honest conversation, letting them know it's a safe space to be like, let's talk about this. I really need this as a priority to get done. I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and help you with it. Let me help you understand that. So, open and honest conversation and having that be a safe space is how we would get there, right?
Yeah.
And, trying to learn how people learn, right? And just ask them, right? Like, how do you learn? Do you know how you learn? Some people don't. So figuring out how each particular person learns will help you become a better coach.
And how do you bring a B minus player to a B plus player? What does that look like? What's your process, or what do you really focus in on?
I challenge them is one thing, right? So one of the leaders that I mentored me for a while, I asked him, and he used to say, I don't lead with a stick, I lead with a carrot, right? And so really, with those particular situations where someone's struggling through, and I can think of someone in particular, I'd say, okay, here's the set of financials, you run with it. I'm going to do the exact same thing. And in 2 hours, we're going to get together. You prepare all your questions. I'm going to prepare all my questions. And we're going to see how we compare. Right. And I always give them this heads up is we're going to be consistent on 70% of the stuff. We're going to ask the same questions, but the other 30% is probably the stuff that would make it fundamentally different from how the other banks are going to think about it. And I'm going to walk you through on how I got there. Right. And so I'd show them my method is not the perfect method by any stretch of the means, but I would try to show them just how I approach it to hopefully help them steal something from there, because then they could steal something from someone else in their method. So their method could be even better than mine.
Well said. I think that's a great way. The reality is, leaders that are in the trenches, that are working beside the team that they're leading, that team is going to learn a lot quicker because they're seeing you actually do the work yourself. I guess one of the tough challenges of being a good leader is over time, as your team grows bigger, you become less involved in the day to day sales element, the origination side, and more just people management. How did you juggle staying relevant with your network, staying relevant with the stuff that maybe personally drove you and got you excited versus the people leadership side? How did you balance that? That there's no right answer to that. I'm just going to
Yeah,
preface that.
there is no right answer. Fundamental, not well. So I'm a deal junkie. I want to feel like I'm making a difference. In the last role, I felt I was too far removed from that. So you have to, I think, for those people that are progressing to be a leader of leaders, you have to be really honest with yourself in terms of how you define success for yourself and what really motivates you. I felt like I was doing less mentoring and more HR and more manage upwards than managing the client base and managing the RM pool. And I struggled with that because the banks, they're big beasts. And when you're that much closer to the sun, the top ends of the echelon, you get a lot of questions. And To be frank, a lot of questions that may or may not make sense. And you can get inundated with answering those. And to be frank, what I felt my job insulating my team from those things so that my team could focus on the day to get the growth that I wanted to, that I
Yeah.
wanted. It's a hard job. It's a hard job to do.
Yeah.
Not that the account management role isn't a hard job either, but it's just a different skill set. And what motivates you?
Yeah.
What motivates me is I want to help entrepreneurs. I want to close deals. I want
Yeah.
to mentor people. I don't need to sit in some ivory tower somewhere, talk about hypothetical situations. Not for me.
Well, that's the reality of why I consider you a rainmaker and a deal maker. You know what you want to do, you do a great job at it, and you don't get distracted. Because sometimes people are either trying to pretend to be something that they're not, or the opposite, where they hate what they're doing and they would have loved to go back a couple of years' time and just keep doing what they were doing before. So
Yeah.
you've actually strategically managed your career now, where from your previous institution to today, my understanding is that you've actually leaned up the people management side. You're not doing as much of that anymore.
That's right.
And you're going back to the roots, which are just doing deals and serving customers, which is ultimately the fun part.
Like, yeah, you've said it well. And I think fundamentally, one of the guys I'm colleagues with now said it to me a few weeks ago, and I think it really hit home with I needed the ego stroke in the last role because I needed to prove myself that I could do that job. But I realized that it didn't make me happy and that it wasn't the right role for me. I think everyone gets to that point where they're like, they see what their boss is doing or their boss's boss is doing. They're like, I can do that job. I can do it better than them. Why can't I just be there? But you
Yeah.
got to realize that at a certain point, what makes you happy, what makes you tick. So it was an ego stroke for me. And I had to check my ego when I was really contemplating this latest role that I'm in now. And I'm so happy.
I could tell.
It was night and day. But that took a lot of conversations with my wife, a lot of conversations with people that were my mentors
Yeah.
to make sure that I could make that decision.
Well, and I hope that someone listening to this, can take inspiration to that, because I know there's a couple people sitting in roles that I interact with right now where they are going through that very same situation. It feels, I don't know if it's more of a lateral move maybe, but in a way, at the end of the day, if you're happy and you like what you're doing, you're in the long term, you're going to do better anyways.
Look, commercial banking, you're going to do well financially. You're never going to be rich, right?
Yeah.
But you're going to do well financially, and you got to realize what your priorities are in life, right?
Okay, perfect. So moving into the last question here. So I'm curious, you over these 20 years, you've done a lot of deals. What's one of your favorite companies, sectors that you've worked with, lent to? Talk to us about one of those deals.
Sure. To be honest, it's an easy question. So I had a picture of this transaction above my old workstation. It's a company that sources baby rainbow trout. They're called fingerlings, grows them in the lake in the middle of, Great Lakes here in Ontario, and then sells them to a processor. And the bank's only security was literally fish in the lake that could swim away at any one time. And the bank hadn't done a fishery transaction in 20 plus years. And so I had to do a ton of diligence on market price, liquidation values, all these things. It was just uber interesting. And the guy that I was doing it with happened to be the best of the best. Like, he was the guy that would fly around North America and Chile, where they actually have the most amount of rainbow trout they grow in the world. And he would do all the speaking about it. It's learning from him, right? Like, it was just like learning from osmosis. I pitched, it took me 2 years to convince him that my bank could wrap their heads around the industry space and do some working capital and some debt and some term debt and stuff like that. End up doing some MA for him as well later down the line. But it took me 2 years to convince him that we would be able to get there. A ton of industry reports I had to read through, and I wrote way too long of a business rationale to do it, but I knew that this was breaking ground at that financially. So that's still one of my favorite transactions that I've ever done. The guy's since retired. He sold the business, done very well for himself. And in typical fashion, he's the guy that drives in with the worst car and the worst hat and the worst shirt. So really humble, great guy. So yeah, that's still one of my most favorite. And still to this day, my favorite deals is to break new ground at the bank by lending into a sector that maybe we don't necessarily have a huge appetite towards, or we've had historically been burnt, or just we're not that comfortable with, right? Like, I like that. Like right now, I'm working very diligently into a new sector that there's a ton of opportunities, but we got to think creatively. And the bank is letting me take a lead on this. It's usually led at a much more senior level. And I love the fact that they're letting me be very entrepreneurial here. We'll hopefully figure it out in the next 6 to 9 months, but I'm game for it. So
I love it. Well, it's always fun to work with entrepreneurs that are passionate about their business and live their business like you live your business. So that's quite fun to learn from those types of people. Perfect. Well, Dave, listen, this has been fantastic. I appreciate all the time that you've given us, and you've shared a lot of good stories. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of listeners that are going to find a lot of value from this. If listeners wanted to connect and ask you questions, what's the best way to connect with you?
LinkedIn would be the way to go for me.
Okay. I appreciate your time, Dave, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Inside Commercial Banking podcast. I love creating this content, and I hope that you found it helpful. Now, can I ask you to do one quick favor? It would help if you could share this episode with your colleagues and like and subscribe to the podcast. The more exposure we can get on social media, the more guests we can attract. I hope this podcast can be the go-to resource for aspiring commercial bankers and middle market professionals looking to learn and grow. So be sure to also check out the Finance Kid YouTube channel for more content on commercial banking and M&A in the middle market. Now, lastly, if you are based in Canada and you have a client that is interested in buying and or selling companies, I would love to connect with them. Please reach out to me over LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and have a wonderful day.